In this lesson, we will explore how team members may face discrimination based on their identity related to gender, both gender expression and gender identity, and sexual orientation in the field, and how we can work to make fieldwork safe and inclusive for people of all gender and sexual orientation identities. Historically, society has been built around the needs of cisgender, or an individual whose gender identity aligns with sex assigned to them at birth, and heterosexual people, or people who are sexually attracted to a person of a different gender or sex, within our communities. However, societal and sociological views on gender and sexuality have expanded during the past several decades to include a broader spectrum of gender identities and sexual orientations. Many geoscience fieldwork environments and systems have also been historically built around the needs of cisgender men without systems or conversations in place to consider how the needs of someone in the field with a uterus might differ from those lacking that anatomy. This includes a pre-fieldwork discussion of how urination, menstruation, and hygiene, and safety related to those things, might need to be considered in a remote environment with a team composed of various genders. Gender and sexuality are aspects of a person's identity, and both are also a spectrum upon which each person falls differently. This graphic shows an example of how different people fall on the gender and sexuality spectrums differently. However, gender and sexuality are not always related to or linked to one another. This graphic aims to demonstrate the various aspects of that spectrum. Identities along this continuum can sometimes inform how they interact with the world. Before we dive into things, let's define some initialisms you'll be hearing. LGBTQ2SIA+. This stands for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, two-spirit, intersex, and asexual people, with the plus sign representing other identities not otherwise captured. Sometimes this acronym is shortened to LGBTQ+. LGBTQ+ represents identities that aren't exclusively cis and/or hetero. Historically, this was noted just as LGBT, but the initialism has been expanded to be more inclusive. In this module, we will use LGBTQ+ from here on out. Let's put this into the context of our gender blob. Letters within this initialism cover both gender identity, in the case of T standing for transgender, I standing for intersex, and sexual attraction, in the case of L standing for lesbian and G standing for gay. We encourage you to do a little more research on your own while reflecting on these two graphics we've presented to explain these spectrums if you're unclear on what any of this means. TGD. This is a broadly inclusive initialism that stands for transgender and gender diverse people. To explore a more detailed description of various gender identities, please refer to this enclosed table in the resources. Field teams often include people of different genders and sexual orientations, yet true inclusion and safety of these identities have not always been considered. As a result of the lack of consideration for inclusion and safety, individuals of different gender identities and sexual orientations have experienced harassment in fieldwork environments through time. In a study from 2014, including 650 field scientists, 71% of women conducting field research experienced sexual harassment, while 26% of women in the study experienced sexual assault during fieldwork. In this same study, 41% of men surveyed experienced sexual harassment and 6% experienced sexual assault. Another study reported results from a survey of LGBTQ+ researchers, which included researchers who conduct fieldwork from within the geosciences. This graphic shows that the participants surveyed were diverse in both gender and sexual orientation within the study, more broadly highlighting the diversity of LGBTQ+ researchers that we have within the geoscience fieldwork community. When the LGBTQ+ respondents of this study were asked about their experiences conducting fieldwork and remote research, 55% of them shared that they had been in an area where they did not feel safe because of their identity, expression, or presentation. In addition, a third of the participants in the survey expressed that they had refused to participate in fieldwork in regions where their personal safety related to their identity was a concern. While these safety concerns related to gender and sexual orientation have not previously been taken into account by the broader fieldwork community in the geosciences, this study clearly shows that safety related to identity is top of mind for many LGBTQ+ researchers who do fieldwork. We encourage the broader fieldwork community to start proactively thinking about it too. The lack of inclusion and consideration of individuals of different genders and sexual orientations in fieldwork contexts also occurs in ways that sometimes are more subtle than harassment, but are still damaging and important to prevent. Some examples include limited or no access to restroom facilities while in the field. For example, when doing research on a small vessel or while traversing across an ice field, people who cannot urinate standing up or must navigate menstruation in the field often have to do so on a flat, wide expanse of ocean or ice, often in view of all other fieldwork members. To build safe and welcoming systems for those who might find that uncomfortable, communication is imperative. In this case, requesting that all team members turn their backs to the person navigating this situation while they do so is one way to build systems that keep the needs of women and TGD individuals in mind. People who menstruate in the field. In 2022, a study highlighted that discussing how to navigate menstruation is often overlooked in conversations related to doing remote fieldwork, especially in polar research. This oversight often leads to individuals to suppress caring for this basic need of changing or emptying menstruation materials while in the field, which creates a very real, potentially long-lasting health and safety hazard relevant to field team members. Misgendering an individual. Often we make assumptions about other people's gender based solely on what we observe of people's visual appearances at first glance, or from previous interactions with an individual. Do not assume anybody's gender. And if you're unsure, ask what people would prefer to be referred to as. If you make a mistake, apologize succinctly, correct yourself, and move on. For example, in response to catching yourself saying something like, "That's what she said," and accidentally misgendering an individual, say afterwards, "Sorry, that's what he said." The pronouns in this example may change depending on the mixed up pronouns. If someone confronts you about it in private, you can still apologize in private, but the main goal is to not draw attention to and make a huge deal out of it.
So when we are talking about gender inclusion, right, we shouldn't assume that because of what someone is wearing, that they are, identify as either male or female. If there's gendered gear, I try to ensure that participants know that they can use any gear as long as it fits. I try to refer to romantic partners as partner instead of boyfriend, girlfriend, husband, or wife, especially if they haven't been self-identified. Instead of referring to groups as men and women or boys and girls, I try using gender neutral pronouns, and especially even for individuals if they have not disclosed their gender identity. I use language like all genders or any genders instead of either gender or male and female. And I know this one is really hard for people, but if I am referring to a group of people, instead of saying you guys, I try to use you all. And what really kind of helped that for me is when I realized that, if I were to walk into a room with people who are mixed gender and I said, "Hey, you gals," folks would have a visceral reaction, right? And we often use language from people who have dominant identities to apply for all groups, right? And people are offended if you use language that is used for minority identities or, not dominant identities. And so that kind of made a click in my brain.
Another practice I've seen that proactively considers transgender identities is when people engaged in the fieldwork, and particularly leaders engaged in the fieldwork, introduce themselves, including their pronouns. And this sets the stage for other people to then introduce themselves with pronouns. And that means that then, for instance, a transgender person who uses pronouns like they, them doesn't feel like they are the only person introducing themselves with pronouns. Rather, everybody on the team is sharing their pronouns, and it makes it much easier and more comfortable both to come out and to share your identity. As a best practice, I would recommend not requiring people to share their pronouns. So I would recommend setting the stage for people to share their pronouns by sharing your own pronouns. And ideally, this would start with someone who's a leader of the field site because they're really demonstrating an example. And then hopefully others feel comfortable sharing their own pronouns. The reason that it is not a best practice to require people to share their pronouns is that in some scenarios, this could lead to a transgender person either having to out themselves when they feel uncomfortable outing themselves, or possibly needing to misgender themselves and share a pronoun that isn't actually the pronoun that they would want to go by. And so it's better to share your pronouns if you're comfortable with it, and through that give other people space to share their own pronouns, but without putting anyone on the spot about their pronouns.
Disclosing an individual's identity without consent. This often happens when trying to figure out sleeping or living arrangements during field expeditions where accommodations are divided between men and women, which could lead to an individual to misgender themselves or feel forced to disclose their identity. One way to potentially avoid this is by not assuming gender and directly asking team members for potential preferences regarding accommodations regarding gender, when possible via a survey ahead of time, or by providing single accommodations for all team members. Discrimination based on gender or sexual orientation. Some locations within the US and globally pose real threats to the physical safety of LGBTQ+ and TGD individuals, as shown in this US map that explores LGBTQ-related laws and policies in different US states and territories, and this map that shows where LGBT identities are criminalized. It is best to avoid conducting fieldwork in these places. However, if this is not possible, make sure that there is a risk assessment and/or emergency plan to protect and guide your team members in these locations. And ask the team members to whom this might be relevant if they feel comfortable participating in fieldwork in these locations. When the types of situations we've just outlined happen in the field, individuals often feel distressed physically, emotionally, and/or mentally. Let's dive into some questions to ask your team and practical recommendations for how to keep people of diverse genders and sexual orientations safe in the field. A question to consider when developing a field safety plan is, does the environment where we are doing fieldwork provide risks to the physical or emotional well-being of individuals based on their gender or sexual orientation? If yes, discuss concerns as a team and work together to develop a safety plan that keeps individuals safe, or consider a new field location if possible. Identify the basic needs of an individual when out in the field. Are there consistent, easily accessible private restroom facilities or clean sanitary resources, like menstruation products, for all individuals to use? If there are no such resources in the fieldwork environment you're working in, have you communicated with all team members about the plan for navigating this environment regarding urination and menstruation ahead of time? This is a highly important consideration for individuals who have to manage menstruation while conducting fieldwork. Additionally, menstruation needs more attention than just restroom facilities. Menstruation often comes with physical discomfort and pain that may require individuals to rest and should not be ignored. Open conversations related to topics and considerations like this will help prevent physical, mental, and emotional risks when in the field.
And another practice I've seen that proactively considers varied identities, specifically gender and transgender identities, is when conduct training before fieldwork considers these issues. So instead of just a generic training about appropriate behavior, there might be examples about what to do in certain scenarios that transgender people experience. And so one that I think is a great way to bring this in is bringing up scenarios for what to do if you hear someone being misgendered. And so in a training video, actually having a scenario where someone misgenders someone and then another person in the conversation corrects them and responds in an appropriate way. And for me, this really acknowledges that transgender people exist and that they might be among the field participants. And so even just that amount in a video would make me feel more comfortable being out during the fieldwork experience, and would also make me feel more comfortable with bringing up issues either to someone else on the team or to the leader of the fieldwork.
We encourage you to research additional resources and strategies on navigating gender and sexual orientation identities, and then create protocols and best practices that are developed and communicated with your field team. For example, this table in Navigating Gender at Sea provides a do, example, avoid list for all field team members, in particular lead scientists, with recommendations on inclusive practices for TGD people on seagoing vessels. A good example we want to highlight from this table is the one regarding asking team members for their rooming preferences, which is one step you can take to avoid having an individual misgender themselves or needing to disclose an identity. We encourage you to explore more of these examples on your own. In the next lesson, we will consider the lens of accessibility and ableism.